everybody for showing up at this Wood Care workshop. We have Caitlyn Barhorst and Mark as our hosts today and our experts. So thank them for bringing their expertise here and sharing this with you. And they're going to take over the show, and I'll let them do what they do. So anyway.
All right, good. Hi, everybody. Mark, thanks for coming. We've got a little bit of a crowd. This has been a great conference for me. In fact, I was over there at the Main Street presentation. I didn't want to leave because there was so much good information, but it's like, okay, I've got to come here and do my thing. So it's good to be here. Caitlyn and I presented last year. We did a wood window workshop. This year we've been asked to do more of a general wood repair presentation. And, you know, I'm coming at this really from a DIY perspective. So the goal is to take away some of the fear maybe you have on working on your own houses or potential projects you have, and to make it approachable and doable. And we're trying to kind of keep it a little bit simple so that, and teach you some techniques, I think, today that are helpful for anybody. If you're a homeowner or if you're just trying to get started in preservation, maybe this will be a good starting point. So I'll just jump right in. We've got 2 hours. So we want to keep it informal. If you have questions, you want to interrupt or, you know, make comments, just please do. And we'll just kind of work back and forth on some of this stuff and go from there. So I guess, you know, I always get the question when I'm working on projects or working on these old houses, people are like, what are you doing and why are you taking the time and putting in the effort to rehab an old structure like that? Why not just tear it apart or, you know, replace those windows or just put in some pressure treated wood or whatever it is that modern construction tells you to do? Everybody thinks that's going to be a lot better. Here's 4 reasons I think that, you know, I think we've seen these before. Maybe you're all familiar with them, but and I won't read them all off. But really, these are pretty important, in my opinion. When you're approaching whatever it is, a building, even a small project, these are some good reasons to take it on. There's financial considerations. If you do it yourself, you can save a lot of money. You can go at your own pace. Really, the material costs can be relatively low as well. And if you already have some basic hand tools and some know-how, you know, it's a pretty small investment. So you're not gonna have to put a ton of time and money, well, maybe a ton of time, but not a ton of money. Another great reason is we wanna, you know, not be putting these homes and this wood or whatever it is into a landfill. And that's something that, you know, owning an old home or working on one, you're keeping that thing alive, you're keeping it standing. It's not gonna get dumped in some hole out in the West Desert, you know, that our ancestors can deal with, or our offspring, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna start out with some basic ideas about safety. You know, there's things that, you know, with these old houses and woodwork you're working on, there's lead paint considerations, there's things you need to worry about and take care of. So you always come into it, you know, with the proper protection. You gotta have a respirator that'll handle any kind of lead paint issues. You know, maybe even a Tyvek suit or shoe coverings, safety glasses, ear protection. We have some of that stuff here today, so when we do our demo, if you guys feel like you need that, even though what we're working on is pretty benign, they're here for you to use. Some basic tools, and a lot of these tools you may already have. You know, a shop vac with HEPA filter is a great thing. You need that if you're working on any kind of lead paint. A multi-tool, like the one picture here, those are really versatile and great for working on old stuff. A table saw if you have it, a router. These are all things that you don't all need all these things, but helpful, certainly helpful. And by no means is this a comprehensive list. I mean, there's a lot of things you can buy and use that help you out, but I guess my point is that you don't need a lot. You can have some simple tools and get a lot done with those. Some of the specialty tools, and you've got some of them up here, we're going to talk about, if you're dealing with an old house, you got a lot of different molding, and a lot of different wood profiles that sometimes are hard to replicate. So if you have some of these old wooden planes, hollows and rounds, where you can make a hollow shape or a round shape, some scrapers, a profile tool so you can figure out what that shape is you're replicating. These are all really good sort of specialty tools that come in handy. But I thought I'd put those up there as well. I put down the infrared paint stripper because that's a great way to deal with paint that's got lead. I mean, you just assume everything's got lead in it on an old house because it does. And infrared strippers are pretty darn handy because they'll heat up that paint without vaporizing it. So you can get it off of there pretty safely. So those are some of the tools and gear. Materials, we're going to talk a lot today about this wood epoxy made by a company called Abatron, and we'll show a demo of how to use that. That's a great material to have if you're going to be working in wood and repairing any kind of blotted out material. Go through a lot of boiled linseed oil, at least I do. It's a great preservative. It's a great way to revitalize wood. This is just some of the basic things you might find or need to have on hand when you're doing the work. So I guess my approach when I take on these projects is I always come into it looking at the condition of the project, and this is what I'm going to highlight. This is a house that I've been working on down in Escalante, Utah, and I have a lot of pictures of this. That's fine. I'm using it, and you can see in this picture just about every type of failure I list over there on the left. Maybe not the insects and animals, although there was a squirrel living in this house for a long, long time before I got it. But the UV degradation, that happens a lot. Water is a constant battle for any house. Water is going to be your nemesis no matter what you're doing. And that's going to lead to rot and paint failure for both of those. The biggest thing that you find on an old house, and I think this is true just about everywhere, is, we were speaking about it a minute ago, is deferred maintenance. Just things not being taken care of over the years. And that's something that, especially with wood windows, is very common. They get painted shut. They never get worked on. The pulley ropes rot and break away, and then you're done. The window doesn't work anymore. It stops functioning. That's the same thing with doors. There's just a lot of deferred maintenance that if you don't keep up on that, you're just going to end up doing a lot of work down the road. So that's something that it's always good to have a plan sort of in place once you finish, to kind of go through and make sure you're looking at things all the time and reassessing and looking for problem areas. There's an image of sort of some pretty serious UV degradation there on that trim. You can see up above near the shingles. And that's 50 years of just baking in the sun, probably been painted once. This is a great example of what water can do once moisture gets into this. This is a joist on top of that porch. And of course, never dried out, just created the perfect environment for rot. So there's water. Many others. I mean, insects are a big thing, obviously. We can talk about that. I have a section here, we'll talk about some log buildings and using things like borat and borax to preserve wood and protect it from insects. one of the things my approach to any of this work is when planning it, I'm always looking for what do I want to retain. And some things are super obvious, like this house, this porch is something that needs to be retained, right? This is obviously an architecturally defining feature of the home. The upward railing and baluster, you can see the ghost lines there. Paint on the brick is missing, it had fallen down. You can see that it's sloping to one side, it's collapsed from some of the rot inside of the roof structure of that porch. So the approach is always coming to this stuff, looking at what we can keep, right? We don't want to just tear this off and build something brand new. What can we keep on that porch? Obviously, you know, the posts, the spindles, a lot of that stuff is hard to replace. So you want to make sure you retain it. The next step is, okay, what can be retained, and what we're retaining, what can we repair? It's always, for me, repair first. So this is an example of using an epoxy repair and a Dutchman repair, which we're going to talk about today, to bring these two posts back to paintable condition to put back up on that porch. So repair is always the first step for me. Sometimes you do need to replace. This is an example of the joist inside of that porch where I've retained some of the original woodwork there that's in good condition, and also used modern pressure treated lumber. And in this case, that was kind of a no-brainer because it's not going to be seen by anybody. It's in there, it's going to be able to function and work better like it was intended. So, but I've kept as much of the original as I can. That's my approach there. And then finally, the last thing is, what can you safely replicate with the information you have on hand? You know, if you're going to make something and replicate something, you kind of need to have a reason to do it and some proof that it's the right thing. If you're going to do some kind of conjectural piece and change things based on what you think it should be because of the house was Victorian or whatever it is, that's usually the wrong approach. So if you can identify what you're replicating, and in this case, this porch needed a few spindles. So those were easy to replicate. We had the original, we knew they were missing. So that was an easy decision to make. Sometimes it's hard to know. You know, you can see on some houses where, especially ones where they've come up through the years and put on vinyl siding or aluminum siding over the original wood clapboard, and they rip all the trim off of there, and you'll go and you'll tear that siding off and you'll see the ghost lines from that original trim. So you can kind of think, okay, that's a way I know that's probably what it was. It could have been. The other is obviously photographic evidence, if you can find that. So, you know, if you're going to replicate, you always want to find sort of evidence of what you're replicating so that you're not going to throw something up there that's not appropriate. So the types of repairs we're going to talk about today are wood splicing, or commonly known as a Dutchman repair. And this is a very simple method that's been around forever. This, I have no idea where the term Dutchman came from. I kind of Googled it, couldn't find anything conclusive about why they call it that. I've always called it that, but I think the technical term is wood splicing. So what you're doing is you're finding a similar material. Say you've got a damaged piece of wood, it's a small section, and you want to be able to repair that. You find a similar piece of wood, you're going to cut out the rotten or bad section, and you're going to glue in a splice or a repair that is obvious that it's a repair. I mean, you can see that. These are stair treads that won't be painted, so you're going to see that repair. But my approach is well, that's sort of an honest repair. You know it's a repair. It's something that is going to function and work, and it's still true to the design and material that you're working with. Obviously, if you're going to paint that, you almost probably never know that it was repaired. So I'm just going to run through the steps here really quick. And this is an example. It's maybe kind of hard to tell from that picture, but I was trying to drill some holes for running some electrical wire, and I kind of missed the side. I drilled on the wrong side. I was drilling from below, and I kind of messed up. So I'm like, well, great, now I've got to fix that, right? So it's not like it's rotted, but it's a hole, and you see this a lot in floors and just anywhere really. And what's the best method of repair? In this case, you could do epoxy, but with an epoxy repair, we'll talk about that, or Kate will talk about that in a minute. It's maybe in some ways more visible and doesn't look quite right in this situation. So what you do is you identify on the piece of material what you're going to cut away. And typically what I try to do is cut away something that's easy to make, like trying to make 3 or 4 circles to fit in those holes. That's a little bit more challenging, but if I can just do that, cut a piece of square wood, right? And the key with doing a Dutchman is you prepare that piece, and you find hopefully the same type of wood. You want the grain to run in the same direction. You cut the piece a little bit oversized. You never in the beginning cut it exactly to the size you want, because that becomes more difficult to fit it in place. So it should be slightly bigger than what kind of opening you're going to make. So in this case, I'm using a multi-tool, and this is a great tool for it. You don't need to use a multi-tool. You can use a chisel and a hammer. You can mark it off with a pencil or with a razor knife and then chisel that out. But I like to use these multi-tools, and I use the piece as a guide. So I've got that piece cut square, and so I can use that, holding it in place either with my hand or nailing or screwing it down, and then using that blade up against the butt end of that splice to cut into the wood below. So that gets you a nice square, relatively square, if you're lucky, cut. Okay, you can see the second picture there where I've got the 2 cuts in that floorboard, and that's going to cover up those holes. So, this step, you can use a multi-tool, you can use a hand chisel, and what you're doing is you're going to chisel down. It depends on the thickness of the wood, obviously, but you're going to go down maybe 1/4 of an inch. And in this case, that's about how far I went down. And you're going to try to chisel out or saw out a surface that's as uniform and flat as possible. Okay? And then you've got the edges, and squaring those up is important. And you can sometimes, in the Dutchman, you can back cut it at an angle. So you've got the surface edge, and you can back cut with a razor knife, so that when you put that block in, it will touch here and maybe not touch near the bottom, but it gets you a nice precise fit along the line you've cut. Another way to do it is to use the multi-tool and the piece put into place, and this is part of the reason why you want to make it a little bit oversized, and then use the multi-tool to cut both pieces at the same time, the floor and the patch. And so when you do that, you end up with the same cut across that whole line, and we'll show you when we do an example up here. And so if the piece is a little bit oversized, when you make that cut and you pull the saw blade out, it'll slide into place and be the right fit. So that's part of the reason why you want to make it a little bit oversized when when you make the replacement piece. And then it's as simple as just gluing it in. And in this case, you know, you can tack it down with some nails and fill those in later. You can pull them out and fill them in later. You can just put some heavy weight on it for an hour or two. And then you end up with the piece glued in and standing higher than the finished surface, right? Same idea. So you're going to use the multi-tool and a chisel, and you're going to work the top of that down to the finished surface in steps. So, you know, a chisel is great for that. A multi-tool is good. You can use a scraper if you need to when you get close to the finished level. And you end up finally sanding and blending that in as best you can. So in this case, you know, this is the same type of wood, but obviously they don't look the same. You know, one of them is much newer. It's been sanded, it's been cut. The original floorboard is darker, but over time that will end up changing and blending into the same sort of color as that floorboard around it. So that's a simple repair method. You can use that here on the floor. You can use it on a vertical piece of spindle like that. We've got some examples to show you in a minute where it's a great way to fix window frames. Even just anything, it's a great way to get yourself back to a sound piece of repair that looks like it belongs there. Now, you know, some people, and I'm not one of them, I'm more concerned about making the repair look good and right, less concerned about making sure it matches exactly. But that's just me. I don't know. So that's wood splicing. Do you guys have any questions? I kind of went through it pretty quick.
How does this work good on a board's hinge where you're moving your board's hinge? You want hatch boards?
Yeah, it totally works great that way. In fact, I'll show you some more images when we get down here where in this same house, they installed electrical in the 1920s, and they cut boxes. They put the electrical behind the trim, the casing. And so they cut into the trim to put that in there. And I wanted to move that out of there. It's the same way with a mortise on the door. You know, in that situation, you've already got the thing mortised out. You're going to cut a piece, a replacement piece, and you probably can, if you have a table saw or access to something really accurate, you can cut it very precisely and just glue that in, and then plane it down with a block plane, cut it down with a multi-tool, chisel, whatever works. It's great for, you know, hinges. It's great for door jambs where you're changing the lock. Or it's great for if you had an old door with a deadbolt cut through there and you don't want to have that anymore. It's great for doing that. You can use this repair technique in just about any situation, trim, structural stuff as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to turn it over to Caitlyn, and she's going to go through an epoxy repair, unless there's more questions about this. We can talk about it more in a minute if you need to. But
That one's going. You're good.
oh, you're good.
Okay, so I've been working a lot with this material, this brand Avtron, the two-part wood epoxy system. There's other brands out there, but I'm experimenting with. But it's a structural repair in the sense that you don't really want it to act as a structural, you know, more as a tenon joint that you're repairing, but it is structural in the sense that if I need, you know, like in this picture on that box, you can see it, you know, they're recreating kind of a structural piece of wood that's not necessarily super load bearing. You know, you do still need that to be wood. So the majority of the piece. So we have some more pictures. There's the dutchman that are later in line. But really, it's a two-part. I say two-part. There's a liquid part that's 2 parts, and a putty that kind of the Play-Doh 2-part. That's the second step. And so I'll go through some. Unfortunately, the videos are not working because of the internet, but it would just want to get it down as well. So a lot of the works, kind of going back to economic conditions assessment as well. You can see here there's a really big wood sub-sill on this window. It was just always the budget to be able to replace that as the piece of wood. It was actually pretty solid for the most part. And it had a piece of wood, what it ended up being about 8 feet long, and it's just not really within the scope of work. So I felt comfortable going to epoxy and the replacing this, better wired out pieces with the epoxy, and then I did do some actual wood replacement on this window as well. But the first step is removing paint and drying out wood. You really want to get down to the kind of hard wood, so you shouldn't be able to poke anything through it. You want to have kind of grain wood to start with, so you really should kind of end up chiseling also usually more than you think you should, because it's better to have some more space for the epoxy system to work. Checking the moisture of the wood. This project was ingredient, and it was right in October last year, right before we got our snow for forever, and it was kind of raining, so I had to cover it, so let it air dry out a little bit before it was ready to be worked on, so I didn't work on it too wet. And then the next step, after kind of chiseling out the rotted wood, is to mix the liquid epoxy and pour it into the gas. And I have some applications where you can actually mix the liquid, and I might show here is with the funny type stuff. It kind of makes it blurry. It can be used to. It really works well for gravity fed fixing still and things like that. Where you want some more penetrating. With your use of wood fibers, this part 1 of the 2-part system is a consolidant. I've read all the technical things about what that does, but I can't quite remember. You can look it up. And then the next step after that, we actually do want to work before the liquid part dries, because the liquid part of the epoxy and the Play-Doh part have to cure together. So you're mixing the 2-part putty type eco parts that has a big epoxy, and then filling it quietly. That can't go all the holes. And there's some examples. The one on the left is the one I was showing before, so it's kind of this tiger stripe looking thing in the end. Some of those holes actually probably could have been made a little bit bigger. So again, the larger the surface area of the epoxy has, the more successful it's going to be over time. The middle one is decorative casings on historic bay window. It's okay to keep house in Park City that they're reconstructing, and we had to replicate on the details. I could have done it with wood, but I don't have any wood tools at my shop that day, and I wanted to try the epoxy on that, and it worked great. Had it overbuilt, and then once it cured, but then after 24 hours, it came back and it chiseled it down to match. And then the one on the right is similar to what I was talking about. You can see there is sort of a Dutchman repair. This is the corner of a leading rail on Old Thomas Sash, on the nose hash, and so there's a Dutchman and some epoxy that was more of a cosmetics thing. So the epoxy is filling in a hole that's not acting as a structural piece necessarily. but more so whenever the finished surface, but it's good for you, nice and smooth. And then sanding and chiseling down. Don't put in too much because you kind of have to take the whole thing off, so you can't really add epoxy to interior epoxy from what I read. I haven't sprayed it, but I wouldn't want to. And so, then the next step would be to prime. I use an oil-based primers, unslashing. There's not very many good ones out there currently, but that's a whole other topic. And then painting, caulking, and beaded. This one, I kind of had a two-part. I was working on the sill first, and then was also storing the brick gold separately. And there's kind of a cost here in that order. And then, there's the millwork replication one.
Yeah, I was going to detail this well, I'll outline this in more detail. But before we move on to this, I just want to, the Aptron stuff is pretty incredible. Like, it's one of those things where if you're not careful, it's like, if you have a hammer, every nail, the nails, you're going to hit a nail, right? You're going to go, whatever that saying is I'm trying to say. Every problem is a nail if you have a hammer, right? You can overuse the stuff. Like, you can put it, places where, you probably don't need to, or you could do a dutchman repair a lot more economically and probably a better repair.
Yeah, or also just wood filler versus an epoxy. Like, I wouldn't necessarily use the epoxy system to seal nail holes.
Yeah.
Exterior rating.
But that windowsill example right there is a great example, because windowsills really take a beating, and they've got all the water landing on them, and they'll start to cup and they'll start to crack. And if you have one to replace, and I have a picture of one I did replace, we'll show you. It's great, but that's where Avitron is amazing, because you can make that thing look and function just like new in a matter of a few hours worth of work. I think a lot of people look at windows, especially, and they think, oh my gosh, that's never going to get fixed. That's a disaster. We have to tear it out. What that is some Avitron and about 2 hours worth of work on that sill, maybe a little more. But you can really turn it around quick, and it's something that I think anybody can do. It's super easy to do, and it's actually, I don't know, I think it's really rewarding, right?
Yeah.
Because you get at the end of it, and you're like, oh my gosh, that thing looks like a brand new.
Right, within the span of 48 hours.
Well, yeah. So it's really a great product. And like you said, there's other epoxies out there that work pretty well, but this one, I don't know, I've just been using this for probably, 15, 16 years now, and it works. And like you said, it can be structural, and if you use it in combination with doing a Dutchman, like on those posts where you can just, okay, maybe I'm going to fill in some of the big holes with wood, I'm going to fill in some with Avitron, and you use that as a combination, you could end up with a really good result. The great thing about Avitron, well, those are the great things. One of the downsides to it is matching finish, right? So if you're going to paint it, perfect. It'll stain. You can
Paint it as well.
Yeah, you can take. Yeah. So it's a little bit more of a challenge if you're not going to paint the repair or finish it. That's maybe not the best choice. Whereas with a Dutchman, you can get it closer to that finish. But if you're painting, have at it, because don't go overboard. It's not the cheapest stuff out there. The other thing that I run into all the time is, especially on that porch I was showing you, missing molding. Like maybe you're missing a foot, you need 3 feet of it. You don't have enough, and where are you going to find that, right? Home Depot doesn't have it. They might have something close, You can go to a millwork shop and they're going to charge you a couple $100 to make a custom knife. And then they're going to charge you more for the material, and you're going to run the material, and that's a great way to do it. It can be a little bit more expensive. You can make your own scraper or profile if you're only going to replicate maybe a foot of it. So that's a way, and if anybody's interested, I can show you a really good step-by-step process on how to do that. If you have a table saw, or if you have some small hand planes and some scrapers that you can make yourself or even buy, that are different shapes, you can spend some time to get the molding 2 or 3 foot section replaced almost identical to what's there without a ton of cost. Another one is sort of the home center option, or I don't know what the proper term is for it, but you can go in there and find sections of the profile you want. Maybe you can find a piece that matches the upper curve or the convex section, and you can build those together by in place to create a replacement mold that matches the original. That can be a little tricky, but it's doable. So those are some good options. The hand tool method for short runs is a great way to do it, and pretty inexpensive. You're going to have a scraper that you modify and make some changes to it, but that's a great way to go. Yeah, so here's some examples like I was talking about earlier with the Dutchman. So you look at that and you're thinking, well, it's pretty rough right now, right? And those are glued and screwed in, and this is where someone kicked the door in, and in hindsight, I'm looking at that, I should have made it taller, more stronger. You can see where they cut the electrical box into that trim there. So these are sort of ones I have in process, and I use a filler if I need to on certain parts of that, and you can sand that and finish it, and that's going to be, of course, painted, and it's really imperceptible. It ends up looking just like the original trim. Here's one of, this is the same floor that I did the Dutchman repair earlier. And this is where you've got big chunks of this that were splitting off. And it was just a matter of cleaning them up and gluing them back in and using wedges and basic things to get them back into position. And then sanding them down to a surface that was acceptable, right? So there's things like that where you might look at that and think that's just going to be too much work. That's going to be too hard to fix, and I got to replace that whole piece of wood. There's ways you can do these simple repairs and get it done and save a lot of money. So yeah, so here's what I didn't use Avatron on. The one around the corner I did. But this one I happen to have a piece of wood to replace that sill on the left. And you can see just what kind of bad shape. Like Caitlyn was saying, that right there, you could totally do that with Avatron and end up with the same result. But I instead chose to replace it with that. And you can see on the right the result of replacing it. But that's one where it's obvious you can make the replacement, right? You know what it looks like, you've got the original piece, you've got some material that works, it's the same material, so replace it. A lot of times you don't, like Caitlyn was saying. So that Avatron is the next best way to go. So yeah, so you can see sort of a finished product on the right, even though you don't have some of the trim finished. But on the left, you can see where I have replaced with new material, but I've also retained as much of the old as I possibly could. All this, those raised spindles, the actual tin for the roof, I end up using that again. So you can end up with a finished product that's pretty close to what the original looked like. And then some of the structural stuff inside of that roof structure is pressure treated lumber. It's been replaced. Half of it is the original. So it's turned out pretty good. And it's completely changed the look and feel of the house. It's more vertical now with the original railing back up on there. So Amber asked me to talk a little bit about log cabins. Do any of you guys have a log cabin or a log structure? Yeah.
We don't have mine.
You deal with them. And so this is a house that I worked on last year. And if you go back to that first picture, so you look at that thing and you're thinking, well, how is that a log cabin? Right? It looks just like a regular old pioneer house. You don't know it's a log cabin. The owners that bought it didn't know they bought a log cabin. But then once you start digging into things, you see underneath that clapboard, it's all hand-hewn logs. It turns out that this house was 3 single-pen log structures tied together by a guy named Left Hand Collett. He made it into one house, and then early on, as we found photographic evidence of this clapboard siding, he put the clapboard over it, because I think he didn't want to seem poor, didn't want to seem like, anyway, he had one arm. He put all that stuff on there. He put those things together and made that house. So, but here with log structures, they are pretty unique, and you see them all over Utah, right? They're in the back, and they've been converted into a chicken coop, or they're a shed now. But typically, they started out as the person's home. And the way they're constructed is just like Lincoln logs. You've got notching on the ends, and the cabin or the structure is supported in the corners with large foundation piers, stones, typically, is what they used. Big flat stones, and they'd go down. They didn't go down below the frost line. Those things rode up on top. So in the case of this house, over the years, dirt blowing in, the cornerstones sinking down, the sill logs and the spandrel logs come in contact with dirt. And the minute that happens, trouble, right? Because then the moisture is getting in there, and water's leaking up into the log, and insects are showing up, and the microorganisms are in there eating away at the wood, and the house just starts to sink because every part of the base of the house is rotting away. So with this house, we replaced that. We replaced all the sill and the spandrel logs on this house. And it's actually less challenging than you think, because you can support these structures by their corners. And you don't have to move them up very high to get the old stuff out. And usually it's rotted, but you can jack them up a little bit. You can knock the old one out of there, and you can find a new log really easily. And in this case, he wasn't sure if he was going to leave the clapboard siding on, so we hand hewed that down, well, with that axe right there, and also a regular axe, and you're cutting notches into the side, and then you're hewing them off with an axe that has a curved handle like that. So you can see that the handle's curved, it's not straight up and down. So as you're hewing this direction, you can stand next to the log and you can knock off the chunks that you've created by cutting into the log. And that's how you end up with a sort of a hand-hewn look on that log. And I think it's funny because in Utah you see a lot of log cabins. Some of the later ones are sawn. Some of the early ones are hewn like that. And you'll see a lot of different notch types. Like this just had a square notch. You'll see V notches. You'll see U notches. You'll just see all kinds of different things. But with log structures, and in this case, this house, we poured, we dug down every corner. We put in a new cinder block concrete pier on each corner. We put stone on top of that, and we re-supported every corner of the house. You can also splice in half of a log. You can go up 3 or 4 logs and take one out and splice it in. So they're pretty fun to work on, and they're basic technology, just like all these old houses. They're super basic. So people get intimidated by them, but really, the people that built this guy had one arm and an axe, and so it's something that's doable. The one thing I was going to mention about this is, with that moisture and the seal log and spandrel logs, is once it gets above 25% moisture in the wood, that's when all the microorganisms start to get active, and they start eating the wood away, and termites and bugs show up. Borate or borax, you can get a borax stick, and you drill those into the log. You drop them in, and you put a wooden plug over them. You put the whole log in, and then what happens is when moisture comes into that log, it'll activate that borate, the borax, and it's highly concentrated. Once the water gets up to 25%, it'll start to spread. It'll kill any kind of microorganism or insect or bug. So it's sort of this preventive way of the log structure to stop any kind of rot. You can do it anywhere where there's water, potentially a roof line. If you have rain gutters on or whatever, and there's water getting there, you can put those plugs in, and that'll protect the log from rotting out over time. So there's some log stuff.
And these are some more examples of epoxy repairs that I've done. The one on the right, I ended up replacing the actual sill because it was just really cupped and needed to be graded, basically like re-sloped. But the big wood sub-sill is the one I had Berkeley pictured earlier. And then the casing on the outside, you can see whatever piece of wood they originally used had some sort of deformity in it, and it just over time has been accentuated. Ended up taking that whole piece off, stripping it down, cutting off that piece because the whole thing was just kind of wonky, and then we did a Dutchman at the top, so that the old original wood is lower to the eye, and yeah, the sash itself. I did some mild epoxy repairs on that when they're storing it. And then these are some Dutchman examples. The two on the right are not my own picture. They're some on Instagram.
The one in the middle, I just want to comment on really quick, and you see that they've cut that at an angle at the top of that repair. And yeah, so that just helps keep any water from infiltrating that joint. It also gives you more surface area to connect the two pieces. So it's a much stronger, more durable repair. They're a little bit harder to do, but you use that same technique with a multi-tool. And if you cut that Dutchman oversized, so it's standing proud all the way around, and also maybe a little bit longer, you can custom fit that in and get a really tight fit. And this is the kind of thing where if you wanted to, you don't need to, you could drive screws in from the backside to hold it in place if it needed, but really gluing that in with that type of a repair like that is gonna go forever. Well,
Yeah, and then the one it's the same thing. It's like a piece molding profile that they just hand chiseled out to replace those pieces.
or you can replicate that, remove most of the material on that profile on a table saw, or with a hand tool.
Oh yeah. And then the one on the left is the sash, that same greenhouse I've been working on, showing pictures of, and not the finished painted picture of it, but the inside molding profile. We found a modern routed bit that is the same exact knife. And so it's actually a flush. You can see the wood changed, but it's a flush, not a finish there. And we decided to do that again because there was a little bit more damage between the mortise and tenon.
Did you pen that one?
Michael did.
Yeah, I was going to say you did a really good job. So you can see
Yeah,
those.
Kurt Michael's been helping with all that. But so he's ended they're the Mortensen and, well, he pinned the dutchman repair, and then also the 2 pins that are diagonal down lower were the replaced, because you can't see it in the picture, but he kind of worked dutchman did a new pin did that too, so yeah. And then just a little bit about paint removal. I talked about lead paint is the concern. I've used it a lot. You know, depending on what repairs you're doing, you don't need to strip the whole thing unless you want to kind of have, after there's failing paint that has all different chips and stuff, and else then you can kind of decide if you want to strip it all the way down to bare wood and have, you know, a fresh finish. Or if you don't mind that and just repair it, or you don't have to strip the whole thing. But you do want to go down to bare wood where you're doing repairs. You don't want to be fluiding new wood onto old painted wood. You don't want to be epoxying onto paint or anything like that. And then, so once you're painted, there's no need to strip it all the way down. If that's your preferred level of finish.
Yeah,
right?
it's really up to you, right?
Yeah. And so if you just want to sand that paint that's already there and do a good primer and just comfortable with that, then that's totally fine as well. Scraping, there's a lot of different profiles you can use. Profile sandpaper, molding things you could use as well to get your American. And then a red paint stripper. The one in the picture is kind of a lower price range for more of a homeowner type. It's also ceramic plated, a little bit safer to work with, you know, on-site repairs because it get hot. As a professional, it does it a little bit slower than like another picture does. This kind of.
Yeah, it's slower and it can be a little cumbersome at times.
Yeah, so it's, you know, it's really just, and we both have them, and they work great. It's just a bit slower and
Okay.
different projects.
When you say lower price, what are the price ranges between these professional ones?
So this one I think is like $100.
Yep.
And then the other infrared one is $700. And that company even has, the one I have is actually like 30 years old somehow. And then that one, it's all eco strips.
For a long time, they were the only game in town.
Yeah.
Right? And so they still are expensive.
They
They
still
work great.
They work great,
Yeah.
but they do have some electrical things
Yeah.
with the manufacturers. So like, if they, you know, full-time use, it can wear down, you know, bigger. And then chemical stripping, I've done some of that, but I prefer not to because it just gets super goopy. And sometimes you have to neutralize it, and I worry that it's going to impact the finish, you know, lasting chemistry later down the line. And then the heat gun, a lot of people use heat guns. It gets higher temperatures, so it might.
That's the danger of the heat gun is it'll really go. And what's the temperature? I forget what it is when lead vaporizes, but it's easy to go hit that temperature with a heat gun. And then the smoke you've got coming off there is pretty dangerous. The infrared stuff never gets that hot. So it's like a microwave, it's cooking it from the inside. And so you end up with a little bit of smoke, but it's not at a temperature that it's gonna vaporize lead that you're gonna inhale. So that's why they're so much nicer to use and a lot safer. And sometimes they are slower, but in my opinion, it's worth it just to not have to worry about the vapors, you know. I mean, I still full respirator when we're doing this. Like or a mask that's can block that stuff out. You always want to do that anyway. But yeah.
Yeah, and then sanding as well. Again, just in the what level of repair you're doing and what like your finish method is going to be. If the existing paint is already like adhered and not chipping off, then you might not need to sand it all the way down, scrape it all the way down. There's some people, you know, in the window restoration world that have these beautiful, huge, you know,
Vacuum tables.
vacuum tables and then like downdraft tables and then also steam boxes. That is a dream, but it also, you know, puts moisture into the wood that might not want to be, you know, so you have to kind of in help, you know, if you're working with wet wood, it also raises the fibers, so there's a lot of considerations with doing that, but yeah, and then in theory this was going to be a video of the infrared thing, but my Instagram has a lot of videos if you really want to look, or just YouTube. And then, yeah, just information.
Yeah, there's really good information out there about lead-based paint, and you should go read it before you do anything. The state's got a really good site, and the federal, and you know, you want to follow those guidelines. They're pretty, not that hard to follow. You're thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be a ton of work, but you know, good to know what's up with that before you start anything, because everything's got lead paint in it. Any old house, it's there somewhere.
Yeah, and then the National Park Service.
You guys are all familiar with these preservation briefs, right? This is like, this is
Really detailed.
this is first stop for me on any kind of project. And even when I've done a lot of this stuff before, I still go back and look at these. They periodically update them, but they're just best practices, right? They're going to give you what you need to know in a very concise, detailed format. They're just, I don't know, they're the best things out there. And, you know, can't say enough about them. And there's like 50 or 60 of them. So, you know, there's so many, no matter what you're working on your house, brick, masonry, stone, wood, anything, there's going to be a preservation brief that's going to give you some very good information. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll move on to some demo work.
Do you guys have any questions about what we talked about, or?
Yeah, well, can you use that, the mechanical, the infrared stripper on brick?
I tried, but the brick just sucks in that heat.
Oh, okay.
You might be there forever.
Okay.
I think, were you in the meeting with Ask an Architect this morning?
Yeah.
So Strippy, what he showed in there, I've used that a lot. And that stuff is super effective for brick.
Okay.
But like he was saying, it might take 3-4 tons of applications to get it all off of there. And the key with that is to not let it dry out. Like he talked about putting a big, like an 1/8 of an inch thick on there, then you cover it with their paper foil. And in Utah, that's a super hard thing to not, because it's so dry, it's windy, stuff will dry out so quick. So, but that Strippy works very well. And you just have to be patient with it. It works on stone, it works on brick. It's a good way to do
similar
it.
to stone and brick. I don't know if I ever mentioned in that session. They don't really want to pressure wash
Yeah.
wood either. It causes the same type of damage.
You can hose it off. You don't want to use a high pressure, any kind of high pressure water on it. Like like if the Strippy is, I spray it off and I'm down with just hose, water. Or sometimes I try to avoid a bit of soft brush. You can get it off of there with some little bit of water. But that stuff works great. Works on wood too. Works on a lot of things. In fact, for a chemical stripper, it's kind of nice because you put that paper over it and it really contains the mess. And then you peel it off and it brings a lot of it off. And the longer it can sit on there, the more it can penetrate those layers of paint, the better it's going to be. And then, like sometimes, like he said in the early session, you'll just peel the whole thing right off, and then down to bare wood. So, yeah, that stuff works great. You guys can come up here if you want. I think it's kind of standing down there. Sitting down there is not going to be good. You want to put that down? Yeah. Where it is? Oh, thank you. Thanks. Look at the hair. Oh yeah, yeah. Let me make sure I better. Some of the stuff here. Oh, I do, yeah, hang on, let me grab the,
So I'll talk a little bit about the current project. This is also part of that bay window, but, couple pieces, we took off. When stripping down the like, literally 150 years of paint, some damage did happen.
There's that.
The wood is really dry. This piece was made, you can see by eliminating these 4 different sections. So this decorative piece was hand scroll sawed out and had been filled in over time with caulk and just a lot of gunk to almost to where it was, you couldn't even see it. So when we were scraping out all this stuff, there was some damage that happened with some of these pieces that I, need to come in and recreate. In theory, some of these, conditions-wise, would probably be fine because it's going to be 30 feet off the ground and you're never really going to see it. But I did go in on this side. This repair is actually epoxy on this little thing here. Again, it's a non-structural type thing. It's more of a decorative repair. So I would do the same thing here. This one can also overbuild and repair it that way. But I think we're going to do some work on some actual.
yeah, so
Where these are from.
that's from that house we just showed you, the porch. And these were, so this one, I mean, this could be a combination of Dutchman and Abatron, but we'll do the Abatron first. And like you guys can see in here, I mean, it's pretty well rotted out. And what Caitlyn was talking about before is, you want to dig as much of this out of there as you can, just to get the best bond. And but I found with the consolidant, even stuff like this, it'll consolidate that. And when it starts to cure, it'll get to a tacky, like Caitlyn was talking about, tacky sort of feel. And that's when you know it's good to put the next step on. But you want that stuff to really soak in there. And you want it to go down as, into this piece as far as it'll go.
So I'm just fixing 2 equal parts of this. And then we'll stir it for a bit.
You guys, this doesn't smell or it's pretty,
I mean, it smells good.
but if you guys want, we have masks. If you want to wear a mask, it's up to you guys.
Really low.
It's not bad, yeah.
Kind of smells good.
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
So this is the basic kit, but you can buy
Oh, massive.
the gallon
Yeah.
tubs of it if you're doing a lot of work. This is just for a little bit,
And then I think this actually, I have to reread. So to mix it for 1 minute, and then wait a little bit to kind of let some of the, chemical reaction, the bubbles, because I'm mixing it really well, but it has some bubbles to it, so you want to have, I guess those kind of settle out
Yeah.
a little bit.
This is like seems like a very traditional epoxy, this stuff right here. Like if you guys have worked with epoxy,
Any type of.
it's maybe ends up being pretty runny, but it's very similar to any kind of epoxy out there. And really all that's doing there is to consolidate all that rot and give it the other stuff a surface to bond to.
Because using the wood Play-Doh stuff
The place.
by itself
Yeah.
isn't enough.
No.
It needs this penetrating liquid into the wood first.
Yeah, and sometimes when you buy this stuff online, they will not sell them together. So make sure if you're going to buy it, you get both parts.
It's the restoration kit.
This kit, yeah,
That has to
yeah. But
How much is just that kit?
$50 at Amazon or directly from the website too.
I know I'm trying to think of who in Utah sells it. I know there was a log cabin guy in Heber that sold it. I bought it from him before. Probably somebody up here in the valley that has it too. I'm not exactly sure who though.
So while this sits for a little bit, I'm gonna mix the other part, because I'm gonna make a little bit of that slurry that I talked about. We'll try to get in here a little bit more. And then also the fill, this one had some more here where we wanna maybe do a bit of slurry first before packing in the epoxy stuff. Take out a little bit more. So yeah, this you can see still has some more soft, really soft wood. So I'm going to take a little bit more of that out. Set aside. You shouldn't be able to do that. So we want to get it to where it's pretty much solid.
Yeah, it's a good test, get a nail or an awl like that, just to poke around and find where the rot is, where the soft wood is.
Yeah. And I'm digging out more to where it's kind of, right here I can tell it's more sturdy, so I'm really trying to go to where
It's like building a cavity.
That's probably right. Maybe less painful. Although, I don't know.
So do you try and leave kind of the shell around it that you're doing?
Yeah,
So
it'd
you
be-
have a shape?
in theory, yeah, that one I showed where I was rebuilding the entire kind of, that detail was just, I did, I kind of stuffed up the surface and put the liquid in, and I just built a new piece on top. I replicated the shape.
So when you put the second part in here, you want to overfill it. It's going to all be higher than the finished surface. And then you can cut it with a table saw. You can cut it, you can plane it, you can sand it just like regular wood. And the thing about, we didn't mention that, is that the reason this stuff works so well, I forgot to mention this before, is that this has the same consistency as wood. So it'll expand and contract like a piece of wood will. If you guys are familiar with Bondo on cars, for many years people use Bondo on wood. And Bondo actually makes some products now that work better with wood, but that was an incredibly hard finish. So you'd have this big rock in there, and the wood would expand and contract around it, and it would fail. So this stuff will move with the wood. The one downside to this is that it can potentially trap moisture in there.
Right, so that's why that one step where I said you want to wait until it's dry enough.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Weird question, but looking at rebuilding some of the knobs on this one, is if you ever turn it, I would worry about it.
You can turn
Is
it, turn it. Yeah.
I would make sure it's not a piece that's just plopped on, but it would need to have, yeah, like if it's not.
No, you
if
can-
there's
It's not
enough
just like a
surface,
lump.
No, you can turn it.
But you can turn it, but yeah, you want to make sure it's adhered.
So if you do, so if you're turning it, it would be just like you're turning a regular piece of wood. So you're starting at the extremity and moving in, right? So you're never taking a big chunk out of it.
Right.
So if you're gradually turning it like that, yeah, it'll shave right down. You can also, you could, like those big spindles I did on that porch, they had big balls on the top, and I used a lot of Abitrod on that, and I just hand did it to the shape, but I thought about it at the time, if I had a lathe big enough, I'd put that on there, because it took a while.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing about sanding too, is like, I try to only fill what I need a little bit over,
Mhm.
but the less sand, because you're wasting less material too, and then less work.
Yeah, but,
It's easier to
sanding
do.
is the final step.
Yeah.
So cut it and plane it first.
So I'm gonna do a little bit of this and then kind of paint it in so that you can see it's moisturizing the wood. And we're gonna go, pretty much as much as it takes to saturate the whole piece.
Yeah, so this is really great when you've got a piece in place, you can't remove it. It's there, like a rotted out part of a window or a bottom of a post, or part of it's rotted away and part of it's not. You can do it in place and have it repaired, it's solid and structurally, gonna be just like the wood. So it's really versatile that way.
When the honey mixture is mixed and put in, does it dry true to the size and volume, or does it shrink down?
It doesn't shrink. So it's going to be that shape when it's dry. And the warmer, it'll dry quicker, it's warmer.
Yeah, and you can, they also make a cold version. This epoxy is only supposed to work with it between certain temperatures.
Yeah.
And then you can force cure it with heat. That's where heat gun would come in handy, potentially.
I typically let it go 24 hours, before I
Yeah.
work on it.
Yeah.
So you plan ahead and you just get stuff done that way, and then you come back and work on it.
You mentioned that the epoxy can't dry out before you put the putty in. How long do you have until that?
It listed the
It's-
working time is
It's pretty long.
like an hour.
Yeah.
So it really depended, and with any epoxy chemical reaction, it's volume dependent too.
Mhm.
So the more volume you have, the faster it
Yeah.
cures.
Yeah, so if you're doing a thin layer like that, it can take a
So
lot longer.
so these little containers, there's quite a big gap to fill, so I'm gonna do, and I just eyeball, and then we can open that
You
box.
could almost do the
maybe
whole
as well, if
thing.
People wanna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably do the whole thing, because they're.
Or maybe we
most
could
of it-
fill it part way and somebody else can fill it the rest of the way, maybe, huh? I don't know.
Yeah, there's gloves over there. So basically I want to make enough to have it to fill, and then I'll have some extra to mix with this liquid wood to make that slurry to fill in some of these cracks as well.
But you should feel the consistency of this stuff. It's really
Yeah,
kind of
people-
spongy.
You do want to
It's-
use gloves with it.
Yeah, there's some gloves here if you want. You can try it out. But
The white one is not as dense as the tan part. But yeah, I'm just eyeballing it.
you can eyeball it. You don't have to. You want it to be equal, but it does. You don't have to weigh it and make it super precise. But
Yeah. And then it takes a minute. You want to marble it together until it's one consistent color. Go ahead.
yeah, try that out.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of smell it, but it's not terrible. Yeah, it does kind of crumble,
It'll
so I have this
crumble,
like
yeah.
method of like, all the way big, yeah. It's like,
Is that both? Yeah. So
you can see it starting to marble together.
yeah. So see how you want it more mixed than that, but yeah, you want to get that a consistent color.
It's taking a minute to get it.
Like making bread,
Yeah, so it's still kind of marbled, so keep going.
There's a little piece for you.
Yeah, it is kind of, it's pretty sticky once you, There. There we go. Your gloves are not.
No, you want,
Yeah.
those are the ones they give you with the kit,
They're
and
like too
they're
big.
they're pretty
They're
worthless.
like lunch lady.
Yeah. One size fits all. It's not a.
They're not great. They also don't give you a brush for the kid, which is interesting. But they do give this little thing where you can put it in and then inject it in and roll, which doesn't come in a larger kit, so.
Product and everything.
So the product, that kit is about $50, is that what that is?
Yeah, this size.
So, you know, it's kind of adds up. That's why I try to use it more sparingly. But there's certain situations where it's the best option. But
Okay.
I buy them usually in the
So
gallon
I'm
bucket.
just going to start
And,
small, start packing it in. I'm gonna
But,
do
you
a
know,
little bit more.
The more you
This
use
doesn't
it, the
seem
more
to
you
soak it
figure
up
out like how
quite a lot.
Because at times you feel like you overfill it, you know, and excess.
Because the liquid, you know, it really is a system that works together, it seems like, so it's,
Given repair.
the liquid part wants to be there to build it from.
It may do several,
So,
and she
really
dug a
just
lot
kinda-
out of there, so
Start
it may, yep.
packing it in. It's pretty fun. I guess if y'all want to try, y'all can get gloves. We don't really have any.
You got some gloves right there in that box.
So,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. And if you want, we can work on
Yeah, do the other one.
this one, and we can try to fill that hole.
Save me this one.
Okay. This liquid first. So I would probably just get the paintbrush, or you can pour it.
Yeah, you can pour it in there.
And it's okay to go over a little bit, because it's, you know, once you do the final sanding, you'll. Oh, wait.
Ew.
That's fine.
That's all right.
I'm going everywhere.
Yep.
Here, see what I can do. I'll hold it. So you can keep working on
Oh, you got it, okay.
it.
And so here I'm just, and I'm also kind of trying, because there's a bunch of little fibers that I'm trying to kind of get the epoxy kind of situated between. And trying to get rid of any air hole that potentially might be in this gap. And then it's probably good. And I take a chunk of that and start.
Oh, that's a
That is
funky
fun.
texture.
It's like it's like
You know what
airier
it reminds
than-
me of? Is cinnamon roll dough.
Oh, yeah.
Like buttermilk cinnamon roll dough. Like
It's
light
almost
and
like
fuzzy.
those,
It's this thing too, if you wanna.
That old school candy.
Or
peanut-
taffy.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, the peanuts.
The peanut candy.
Yes,
That's
that
what it
tastes like
does.
banana,
Yeah.
which is so confusing.
Yeah.
So, right here, I'm gonna kind of do a bit of a slurry, because there's a bit of a narrow hole
Yeah,
that
so
I
you-
wanna fill
yeah.
there, so I'm just getting some of the liquid that I have access, I'm just kind of blurring it in there, and then I'll kind of overpack it.
So you can't overmix making your slurry by adding too much epoxy to it.
Right. It's really whatever your consistency you're trying to get. Sometimes I'll want to do it really liquidy to try to get in, you know, the sills, and then sometimes I want to do just a little bit as a kind of a finishing, kind of feathering out method at the end. You know, you can kind of paint it on, and it kind of transitions the epoxy to the wood.
So it doesn't cure different consistencies in different harvests?
No. No, I mean, the consolidant, no, they're about the same.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm kind of missing some here.
See, this is where you'd want to overfill beyond that crack right there, so that when you come back, like
Yeah,
Caitlyn was saying before, you know, once it's cured, adding more to it
It's hard.
becomes problematic, yeah, so you want to overfill the crack a little bit. Not too much, because then you got to come back and machine it
Sand
down.
so much, yeah. So you
So
want to
it's
do
sort of
it.
this, you know, find the right
So I'm going to
balance.
overpack the end here so that, because I don't know what tight.
Yeah.
It looks like it might be there, but I'm gonna try to make it.
Yeah,
so
so
it's
that's
a bit
good,
more
looks good.
space.
Good, yeah, that's good, because I was gonna ask the question, how do you know the actual end of the
I
spindle
don't,
is?
I can measure it off of this one, but I'm gonna leave him some extra to cut.
Yep.
And it does, it does take some practice to get the consistencies pretty. So I really want to.
Like that'll be so easy to clean up on a table saw. I can just run that thing on all surfaces and no sanding or very little
And I'm
sanding.
terrified of table
So
saws.
on this one, you use
Yeah.
a finer tooth saw on that?
Can, yeah. Yeah, I use a,
Yeah.
I can't remember how many teeth I
Yeah,
have,
and then-
but yeah. the
Yeah, that's
final
fine,
better,
'cause
'cause
once
you
that
want
dries, we
you
will
want the
come in
final-
and
get
it
as
does
close to the
take
final finish as you can, just like you would on a piece of
You'd come in and just
wood,
sand all that.
right?
So are you gonna do like this whole thing all the way around?
I mean, we have enough epoxy we could do.
Do it, yeah.
So do you do the same sequence of section?
Should we get rid of that?
Right.
It looks like
So-
there's a little bit.
I would have done that first on these. I would have done the 80 and really taken it down to, got all that loose paint off of there. And then done the epoxy and then done the finish sanding after that. Yeah, you want to get, any loose paint off there if possible.
And I am trying to kind of feather in some of the corners so it doesn't kind of chip out. So you
Mhm.
just cut it so it does maybe.
I didn't bring my piece, my sample piece that has yeah, like you can really, I was blown away when I first used this, how you work it just like wood. With the plane, I thought, oh, this will just chip out, it's gonna be a problem, and it is just
It
like,
doesn't have an epoxy dedicated plane, but.
it'll work, yeah, it'll gum up your plane, but you can clean it off. But it's pretty amazing how it'll work.
And so like this corner is kind of wanting to come off a bit more, so I'm gonna overbuild it and kind of feather it in.
Yeah, for me, right now, I would just make that as square as I could.
Right.
And
So you just get a block of wood and press it?
yep, exactly. You
Yeah.
could do a block of wood. There's one right there. Yeah, you can form that thing.
Isn't it fun?
It's really satisfying.
Yeah, don't poke yourself with that thing though.
Yeah.
You signed the waiver though, didn't you?
Was that what the paper
I
was
don't-
for? I didn't know I was signing.
I didn't know either, so.
I just signed away my first
They
board
said in
or
case you
something.
fall down, yeah. Yeah, see, that looks really, see, it has a hard time.
Yeah, right
here.
here, this corner's a little bit tricky because I might need to put a little bit more liquid in there.
So I like to put the consolidated on and let it sit for a while and get tacky. Because the tackier it is, the better the second one will adhere to it.
Right,
I
but you
mean-
definitely want to wait, you don't want to wait
Yeah.
too long.
But if you get it a little bit tackier, it'll stick right to it and make it a little bit easier to deal with.
What are the best oil-based primers that you can find?
I use that. I don't know. Yeah. Zinsser? Zinsser. I like the Zinsser stuff.
Zinsser stuff is okay. I have yet to find it in stock, but
Most,
Bare Mineral, or Benjamin Moore, has an oil primer.
oh yeah, try that.
There's a lot of consensus that's just like, there's nothing really good right now, and no one really knows.
Well, places like California, you can't buy it.
Ah, you want to
I mean, a lot of
try?
states have outlawed it, so
Oh,
not a lot of companies that want to make
Fill it
it.
up, guys. Yeah, we just.
So I'm gonna call that
I'm
good.
good. That looks great.
So I overpacked it a bit, but not too much. so that you can
Had it where?
Make whatever
Will
shape.
it- That doesn't expand at all over the 24 hours?
It'll dry exactly that dimension, that
I might
position.
pack in that corner. a
So
bit
do you
more,
have to
but-
set it up, like, would you set that up vertically to dry? It doesn't matter?
You could. I don't think you need to.
Yeah, I would
It
probably-
really, it'll just stay.
So maybe we should start
Yeah.
the thing, or?
Go smaller so you fill in all the holes first. Yeah, to try to get rid of any air pockets. I think so.
I have a random question. So my sister-in-law has an old bungalow in Sugar House, and there's still single pane windows, absolutely warm. However, not very warm in the winter time. So she had to put like some serious curtains
No
up
workshop on
and
June
everything.
24th.
But what are the methods that she could utilize to keep those beautiful windows but keep warm in the winter?
Storm window on the outside.
Okay.
Check if the glass and the putty is failing, which it probably is, and that needs to be repaired because there's going to be air and water, which is heavy coming through. But the first kind of protection would be through the storm window. That's my highest recommendation.
Are they painted shut?
I think.
Are they operable? You can't open
I
them?
think one is operable.
Yep.
I think the rest are painted shut. And she
Like a
opted to
little bit
keep
more,
on, which
some
I'm
more
like,
portable.
"Yay," but, you know.
So don't let her think that a single pane is a bad thing,
Yeah.
because it's not. So she can make that window almost energy as efficient as a brand new one. In fact,
Or more.
and more in the case of like a vinyl.
When she wants to work on it, I might have to.
So-
see it.
There's lots of ways to weather strip that window. There's this stuff called sprung bronze that works great. You can get those things very energy efficient. If you're fixing the putty, that's a great place to start.
Yep. My turn over there. But you have my number.
I do have your number.
Cool, and then like I brought this little piece that was part of this same project, where we opted to not fix it, because it was just broken apart too much. So we're replicating it, but in theory, you could come in and fill these kind of gaps as well, or even come in and replace this profile and shape it and all that stuff. Yeah, go for it. Stack them in. This piece here. Do you want to do any of
Let me show you just a quick demo a little bit on this Dutchman over here. And just the basics. It's not as fun as the, there you go. I didn't have a multi-tool for years. These things are the best ever. It's like, I don't know what I was doing for all those years without one. No, go ahead, yeah. So this one, I would look at this, and this could be the same repair with Cabotron, but this one also is pretty easy to do as a Dutchman, because you've still got some pretty good material. It's not rotted out. You've got this big split down there. So you can pre-cut a piece and you make that wider. Of course, you make it longer, right? And then I use this as my guide here. And since I don't have a workbench here, I'm just going to clamp this piece on there like that, okay? And then with the multi-tool, see if I can do it here. Yeah, it's annoying. But if you hold that blade flat against that piece, and you're going to cut down to, about here where you've got the check happening. So you get a nice, pretty square cut right there. And then on this cut, I could use this block too to get me kind of what I want here. This one's a little bit harder with this. Thank you, yeah. Should go down a little bit deeper, but that's okay for this purpose. So then you know, cut that out of there. And that's a pretty good fit across the top. It's really tight. And of course you want this surface to be as flat as possible. I see I'm a little bit off there. But you can work that down with the saw or with the chisel to get it better. But then all I do here is glue it in place. You want to get this? You could do both. Right? So if you want to take out the big chunk and put it in and splice in a piece of wood, and you still got that hole, that could be done with Avatron, or even something different.
Can you buy the wood? The new wood with this version of Avatron?
No. So I use a regular wood glue on this, you know, and just glue that and clamp it like normal.
Did I get you?
Yeah, so then I would just glue that, if I have some glue here. So this is a little cheaper than Avatron. This was a piece of scrap wood.
Or, you know, I like using pieces from old wood that the rest of the wood isn't salvageable.
So
you can use some of it too.
that's the best way to do it. You can find old growth wood that it's partly rotted away, you know, and that's not what this is. In fact, this is a piece of aspen, which is not the best, and this is a piece of pine. But then you just glue it up like you would any kind of work, you know.
So by mixing those two species, you're not going to counter this problem,
I would, only for this demo, would I do it? I wouldn't use it. If I were doing this as a real repair, I wouldn't use this aspen. I would find some pine like this. Or, yeah, whatever. If you got some old growth stuff. But then you just clamp it up and glue it, clean out the glue if I have some. Yeah, then anything that is, thank you. Then you end up with a piece, you know, maybe I could have come a little higher here. It's oversized, and that, you know, regular wood glue just takes, you know, let it set it for a day or whatever, and then just machine it down to whatever you want. But, you know, making it oversized here and wide here, and then you can shape it to That's super easy to do. And you can, without this, even with just a handsaw and some chisels, you can cut that shape out and end up with the same result. It's just that is so fast and easy. But I've done plenty, so there's certain times where you can't get that tool in there, and so a chisel is needed, you know.
Yeah.
But old and modern, and mix the two.
Is there a favorite lumberyard in the valley?
I don't know up here because I'm not up in Salt Lake, but my favorite lumberyard for me in Escalante is the city dump. I never leave there without something else. I drop off and I take stuff out.
Yeah, if you're in the valley, it's also with the first one.
Okay.
There's, I'm trying to remember what it's called. Starts with a D. They build cabinets and stuff. But I found out about it, I went to this community shop that's in like South Salt Lake, that's where it is. But they told me that there's this place that has really, like, they just throw out their old, like, you know, their hardwood in the dumpster, and they're like, they just, the dumpster dive, it's fine.
If you KSL is a great place to find old growth wood and stuff. Like window sashes are always on there, but I want you to cut those up, and people have thrown them out, and that's old growth on there. Douglas, vertical grain Douglas fir flooring you can find on there sometimes. There's the salvage yard. What's his name? George, he's still there, I think. I've got a lot of flooring from him in the past. He'll have old growth Douglas fir, vertical grain stuff. But KSL, it's interesting if you know what you're looking for and you see it on there. It's sometimes a really good deal. In fact, a friend of mine found somebody clearing out their barn in North Salt Lake, and I think he got, these were sawn cedar shingles. He got, like, I think enough to do his whole house from this guy, because he bought them like 30 years ago and never used them. So yeah, I don't know. If you know what you're looking for, KSL can be pretty good.
I've also dumpster dived.
Have you?
Yeah.
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 If I-
Most of my furniture in my house is reused from people tearing out old bungalows in
Yeah.
the sugar house. It's beautiful.
If you go to the Restore, Habitat Restore, sometimes they'll have sashes and old doors and stuff that may not be worth salvaging, and you can get stuff off of those too. But then you're dealing with paint that maybe you have to strip off it as well. It's just more work. But you end up with, it's hard to see all that stuff get thrown out.
Yeah.
Because it really is irreplaceable. It's been around forever. And you can't get new
Right.
stuff that's that tight grained. Obviously, they're growing a lot quicker. And well, that's kind of it, unless you guys have questions more, I think. Hopefully.